Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to introduce Frank Rainwater, who is the Executive Director of South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. This is the state agency that has traditionally helped most counties with redistricting. They have the capability of doing maps or acquainted with what the Department of Justice looks for. And I asked him to come tonight and explain to you what they use as the parameters and make you aware of it. I don't believe any of you, actually I think Mr. Livingston might be the only one that's actually been here through a redistricting before. I will tell you, we will prepare a resolution, if not for the next meeting, the first meeting in January, that will set out what you're going to look at. It's pretty much set. It's different now because when the Department of Justice used to be involved in the Voting Rights Act, they sort of said, here's what we're looking for. Well, they're not involved in it anymore. And so they will come up with it. It'll make sense. Just so you realize, I think you all know it. When we set our districts, the school district follows our districts. They don't separately set their districts. And I had approached each of you before with maps that Mr. Rainwater's office did with what's currently there, and then where council members' seats are currently. That's a consideration that they'll take in. So without stealing any more of his story, I'll introduce Frank Rainwater. If he'll come to the podium, and he's going to give a presentation. If you have questions, I don't know if you want some during the presentation or afterwards.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Rainwater, please come on up, and we may interrupt you once we get somebody else here and just call us in the official order, but we'll take the information for now. How about that?
That'd be fine. Do I need to leave this on? Or?
No, sir. Please
Okay.
feel free to take it off as you speak.
Thank you. I got too much of a southern drawl. You're not going to hear me
If you could excuse me to take mine off, it would be better.
So, Mr. Chair, members of council, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. We want to talk to you a little bit about redistricting. This is very much an educational session. We don't have any proposed new maps or anything like that because I think the process is best as you have it here, to have some educational, to have some public input before you start drawing the maps or considering maps. It is a requirement. You need to get this done by the time filing opens in the middle of March. Ideally, you like to get it done a little bit sooner than that. Is this a member?
Hold, just stop right where you are.
Stop.
Pardon me.
We're getting close to a quorum.
Yes. Now we got a quorum. He was just giving us some background while we were waiting. So.
Okay.
Now we'll call the meeting to order.
And I'll perfectly pause if you want to do the Pledge of Allegiance or
we'll
prayer.
do that. We'll go ahead and honor that since it's on our agenda. Let's go ahead and have that. Nick's not here. I think I usually have a prayer up my sleeve, so I'll handle that about that. Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you, Father, that you have sent us on mission for you, Father, and made us ambassadors to the Newberry County Council. So, Father, may we seek your face. May we seek your wisdom, for you said if we lack wisdom, let us ask for it. So, Father, we ask now that you would lead, guide, and direct us in a way that would honor you, would draw us closer to you, and would be the right thing for Newberry County and those we serve. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for pausing for that. Is there, just really quickly, are there any additions, deletions to the agenda?
None.
Hearing none, is there a motion that we accept the agenda as published? Motion, is there a second? Did I see a second? Second, any discussion? All in favor? By show of hands, it is unanimous amongst our quorum. Now.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll be glad to take questions during or after, whatever suits you. If you're like me, if you have a question and don't answer it at the moment, or ask it at the moment, you're going to forget it later. But again, about process, this requires 3 readings. A lot of counties will adopt the first reading just by title only to give you time to go through some of the process. It depends on how your county wants to work. Again, you want to have this done as much before March as you can, so people have time to consider the maps and understand where the new districts are. on that. As Jay mentioned, we do not have required pre-clearance by the Department of Justice. And my point upon that is it's much more of a burden on you to understand what you're doing and what you're responsible for. Our office is here to assist, but I'm not your legal counsel. We're experts in this. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we've been training internally and going to conferences to maintain this. But we're here to help you. But it is a balance between legal requirements and statistical requirements and in some areas that you have to take into account, and I'll get to those in a minute. So to begin with, I know that excuse me.
Sorry for my tardiness there.
So I know a report's been provided to each of you on this, and I believe it'll be made available to the public in the minutes on this. But I want to talk about three basic areas of the criteria or what you have to look for and consider in redistricting. The first one is the Voting Rights Act. Excuse me. The first one is the 14th Amendment in the Equal Protection Clause, or one person, one vote. The second big area is the Voting Rights Act. And the third area is called traditional redistricting principles, and that's another set of our criteria. So let me take a minute to kind of focus on each one of these and go through that. I'm going to begin talking on page 3 here, page 3 of 6, if you have that handout in front of you in our benchmark report. When we talk about the 14th Amendment, the whole purpose what we have to redistrict is try to make sure that the voices in every district weigh about the same or count the same as the voice in every other district. And because of population change over time and shifts in populations, there are more people in one district than another. And if you take the simple example of, let's say you have 100 people in one district and 200 people in another district. Well, those 100 voices count more because one council person only has to listen to 100 people. Whereas if you had 200 people in that district, that council person has to listen to 200 people. So as that changes over time and gets out of whack, that gets away from one person, one vote. And ideally under one person, one vote, you would redraw those two districts to put 150 people in each district. So that's the purpose behind it. We want in the 14th Amendment, we want everybody's voice to weigh about the same. It doesn't require mathematical certainty or equalness. You have some range there, and I'll talk about that. But to highlight here on page 3, we have a graph for you on the right, and we have a chart for you on the left. And on the graph, there's a red line. That red line represents the ideal level that each district should be to have perfect perfection under the 14th Amendment, the one person, one vote. You have 3 districts there in gray. Those are above that level. You've got District 2 that's well above it, and District 5 is well above is well above that mark. But you got 4 districts below that. So in essence, what you're going to have to do is shift some population from districts 2, 4, and 5. I mean, I don't know who's in District 4. District 4 may get by unscathed in this. It just kind of depends. But basically, you're going to have to move a lot of population out of District 2 and District 5 into these other 4 districts to balance out one person, one vote. More specifically, if you look at the table on the left there, in District 2, you are 647 people above the ideal. That's a lot of people. District 5 is 295 people above ideal. District 4 is 39 over, but it's not that much. Again, District 4 may or may not get affected. Kind of depends upon the layout. But you see these other 4 districts, District 1 is 221 people below ideal. District 3 is 279 below. District 6 is 144 below. And District 7 is 334 below. So you've got a lot of council districts that's going to get changed. Now, how much do they have to change? There's a concept or requirement under law called the 10% rule or deviation. So when you're wanting to abide by the Voting Rights Act, local governments have some flexibility. They don't have to be perfect. Generally, in a congressional district, each congressional district in South Carolina is only different by one person out of the almost 900,000 people or 600,000, whatever. I can't do math real quick. But out of hundreds of thousands of people, there's only one person different in each congressional district in South Carolina. You don't have to be to one person. The courts have given you what's called, the courts, and also state law, but state law says you have to be below a 10% deviation. What is that deviation? That's basically the range between your highest, most populated district and your least populated district. And we have that spelled out for you at the bottom of that table on the left side of the page. The lowest district is District 7. District 7 is 334 people below the ideal. They're under by 6.1%. When you look at District 2 is over by the largest. They're over by 12%. So when you look at that range there between -6 and 12, that's an 18% deviation. Again, that's well above the 10% standard. So you want to get below that 10% standard. Our recommendation is to get to 5%, but that is a recommendation. And I'm going to say it's a recommendation for a couple of reasons. One, if this was the only thing under the criteria you had to consider, that's one thing. But you've got to balance these other factors. You also have to look at the Voting Rights Act, and you're going to have to look at other factors such as number of precincts and communities of interest. You're going to have to balance all these factors. And if you draw things too tight, you may not be able to make all these things balance, and that'll make more sense as we go through that. But you're going to have to set on a range here. How close to that one person, one vote do you want to get? Some counties are doing less than 5%. Some people are sticking with 10%. But that's a decision you have to make on what's right for your county, and that's when you start looking at some of the numbers. But that's the one person, one vote. You want to try to make sure that the voices in each district count about the same as the voices in another district. So, just to highlight here on the next page, on page 4, these are your current districts. We have outlined for you the addresses we have, and these should be your physical addresses of your residents for each member. It is certainly our intent not to put 2 council people in the same district, unless there's something very strange that happens, but it's not that, and I'm sure it's not your intent to pair 2 incumbents together in this. Jay mentioned earlier, we need to get the school board addresses so we can impose them in here too. So when we're drawing the plan, we don't want to intentionally impose 2 school board members in the same district either. So we just need to make sure we have the right addresses for everybody when we go through this. But when you look at the maps, it'll be a little, you know your districts better than I do, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge here because your growth there, your high areas are District 2 and District 5, which is at the middle and the bottom. And then you've got District 4 there, which may or may not need to be changed. But you've got to take population from District 2 and move it to all these other districts, or in District 5. But these 2 districts don't always touch. So you're going to have somewhat of a domino effect as you push in one area, it's got to give in somewhere else. And that's an important thing for people to remember. The line's going to have to be drawn somewhere. And I know you're going to split a street or it's going to be people on opposite sides of the streets, but it's just obvious the lines have to be drawn somewhere. But when we get to the traditional redistricting principles, you'll understand better where some of your flexibility is and what we go through. If we look at page 5 here, we're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act, and we'll look at the demographic information. So to help explain this chart a little bit, this is the racial and ethnic breakdown according to the 2020 census in Newberry County. If you look at that percent in about the middle of that top column, percent NH white, that's percent non-Hispanic white. Total county population is about 60, just right at 60% white. And if you go over a couple of columns, you look at that non-Hispanic, that NHDOJ black. That's non-Hispanic Department of Justice definition for black. They make up 28.6% of the total population. But then you start looking by each district, what is that black-white mix and all that? So you see there that District 1, and I'm just going to refer to the black population because when you're talking about the Voting Rights Act, it's about respecting the community. It's about protecting the interests of the minorities where their vote can count. So District 1 is only 18% black. District 2 is 7%. District 3 is 27%. District 4 is 22%. District 5 is 20%. District 6 is what we call a majority influence district. It is 49% black. And then District 7 is your majority minority district at 59.7% black. So when you look at the Voting Rights Act, it says you have to protect the voting rights of the minorities under certain conditions. Used to, there's a thing called preclearance, and the Department of Justice looked at a Section 5 analysis. That's been thrown out the door. That's been ruled unconstitutional. And now the analysis is shifted to a Section 2. And Section 2 analysis basically requires us to look at three things. Are the minority areas compact? Are they compact enough where you can draw a district? For example, if this was a perfect society and if Newberry County was 1/3 black and every 1/3 house was black, there was no way you would have a compactness there in the district, that you just couldn't draw one. But that's not what reality is. So you have to look at where those communities are, where those precincts are, and obviously you have those concentrated here in 6 and 7. Then you have to look, did the black population vote as a whole? Do they vote as a block? And then you also have to do analysis on whether or not the white population votes as a block to prevent candidates of their choice in there. So that's a statistical analysis that has to go through. And that's something to be aware of. As you start changing these districts, you're going to have to move population. But it looks like you've got a pretty good balance here. And I think that's something, council, you need to consider is, do you want to try to maintain this balance, or what type of shift is going to be here? Sometimes you've had a lot more growth in one race than the other, and that's going to upset the balance. I'm not really seeing that much in Newberry County. But you have to be careful when you start shifting the population around, you don't dilute the voting strength of the minority unconstitutionally. I mean, sometimes it's required because of the growth, but you need to be careful and go through those analyses there. So I'm pointing that out, that because District 6 and District 7, they have to gain a lot of people. And it's where you pull those people from, and you want to make sure you don't run afoul of the Voting Rights Act in looking at those percentages there. So I point that out as something for council to consider when we're doing this, or be aware of. And then on the next page, on page 6, there's a list there at the bottom of what's called traditional redistricting principles. There's some indented bullet points. The first thing is you have to remember that districts have to be drawn contiguously. In other words, every part of your district has to touch another part of that district. You can't make districts look like checkerboards where you got a section here and jump over here and go to another part. Your districts have to be contiguous. That's a requirement. Districts also need to be compact. Now, compactness kind of looks, it's almost an eye test. There is a statistical test to do for that. But census blocks are not equal population. You got more urban areas, more rural areas, and those blocks vary. So sometimes the patterns look different. But again, it's kind of like that eye test. You don't want a lot of districts look like you've pick and choose all over. You want those districts to be compact. Another thing to be aware of is try to avoid splitting precincts. Now that goes back to that kind of relates back to this one person, one vote threshold. Precincts are not the same size. And to balance the population, sometimes you have to split a precinct. It makes it more difficult on voter registration and voters, and you want to make it easy for them to understand, but just when you're divvying up the population, you're going to have to split probably some precincts, but you don't want to do it more than necessary, and that's something we have to look through to try to keep as many precincts whole without splitting that. But in balancing the population, you're going to have some of that. The two most important things that you have to consider are what are your core districts and what are your communities of interest. And these are traditional principles the courts have recognized as acceptable under redistricting. In Columbia, we can look at these maps and we know how to add and subtract very well, and we can balance the population, and we can look at the demographics and look at the black, white, and balance that as best we can. But it's also important for you to consider what are your communities of interest. Those don't necessarily pop up on a map. So in a community of interest, it may be a neighborhood, it may be an economic zone, it may be a business zone, it may be a school area, it may be a city or a group of cities in your area. But you have to balance that. You're going to, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to draw the line somewhere. and it's going to split some neighborhood or some street or something. But you have to determine what are the more higher priorities. What areas do we not want to split on that? And you have to, when you look at those districts and look at that map, what areas, if you got District 2, I think I said was the fastest growing area, what area does it make sense to give up? Is there part of that district that's your core district that's maybe been there the longest or the oldest neighborhood or something like that? What is important about District 2 that needs to be kept together before that gets broken apart? So those are inputs and decisions council needs to make and provide for us. And I'll jump back to process here. Our process, we help counties in different ways. Some counties, we just turn the maps over to them and they draw their own own districts. Some of us want to take a first stab, and some of you, will want to have more public input and provide feedback to us. We ask that if we're going to help you draw the maps, that we have one contact person, and we've been working with Jay on this. And what we like to do is for council to work together and get their priorities and send us that list of priorities so we know what's important in your areas as we begin to draw the maps and do that. It may take you several iterations to do this. We will draw a map, and once you see it, we're not always able to meet all the criteria because sometimes people have too many conflicting interests and we just have to draw a line. But again, this is a process. This is not the first map we do. You have at least 2 readings, but you may want to consider one in a work session and then provide feedback. So there's multiple ways to do this. Regretfully, we are under that time crunch. Normally, the census releases this information in April, and it gives you almost a year to do this. This time, they did not release the census data to September, so we're a little bit behind the wheel. Ideally, we would have been doing this in August and September before football season started, and now we're here at the holidays starting to do this, so it's a little bit more work on you, and it does put a little bit more burden on the public for them to get a chance to get involved. But it's important to have these meetings. I know you're streaming this. People can watch it and rewatch it. But, and that's why we've presented this report. We think we've provided a lot of information there for people to understand what's going on. And then we'd like some guidance from you on what's important. On what's important to your areas as we start to add districts or take away from a district or add to a district. We need your input on what's important in your areas. So, Mr. Chair, that's all that I have to present. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, let's, anyone with any questions?
I do. I always have questions. Anyway, the timeline, you said you need our input on third reading by when?
Well, you got to have 3 readings. We need your input before we draw the first map. That's preferable. Okay. Sometimes I've had one county recently that said, give us an idea to, different counties work different. One county said, give us your best shot, and then we'll look at communities of interest. But once we get your input, it'll take about 2 to 3 weeks for us to turn a map back to you. I will tell you, with the holidays starting to get close here, we would need your input very soon to get the first map back to you before Christmas. If not, it's going to be early in January. But then it just depends on your time schedule. I think y'all meet twice a month. If you need a special meeting in here to consider this, part of that's your logistics. How do you want to absorb the map? Get time to feedback, but you have to have 3 readings. You don't have to have the map on first reading. I would suggest you'd have at least a draft map for input at the second reading, and certainly you need the final map by the third reading. But hopefully the first map will be close enough and it won't take that much time between second and third reading.
So just from my understanding, if we had a title only first reading, that would be, we could have that prior to your first
Correct.
Map.
Yes.
And then we would have the preliminary map from you that we would have for us to provide input, make changes to whatever prior to our second reading.
Yes, sir.
And then after our second reading, if we had changes, you'd come back to us with a revised map.
Yes, sir.
And we would have that revised map prior to our third reading.
Yes.
And then it would be ordinance. So if we did that under that timeline, what would be a realistic third reading date would you think? Would it be February?
I think February. I mean, I think you'd be rushed, and we'd be rushed to get it done by the end of January, but I think the middle of February, you know, if you're a month ahead of filing, that's, again, I don't run for office. That sounds reasonable to me, but y'all may think you need it quicker than that out there. But yeah, to follow up on your question, you're going to understand the comment earlier, you could adopt it by title only next meeting, but if you could get us your feedback before the holidays so we have it ready to go in January, that would be ideal. So, I mean, you got about 2 weeks here just to, at least for you to meet and provide some comments to us. And again, it depends on how well y'all work together. I mean, I've got some counties that work great together, and I got some counties that don't work as well together. So, you know, if your cooperation, and it may take several iterations of our map, or if you want to get all in one, I mean, it just kind of depends on your feedback. Ultimately, you're going to get to the same place. It's just how quickly and how much you want to go with that.
Did you have something, Jay? I saw you lean forward.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure Mr. Hipp's through with his questions.
I have one other question. On page 6 of 7, we got the winning party in districts 1 through 7 in the last 2 elections, and it says REP. What is REP?
All right. This is not necessarily the whole. I mean, when we do this analysis, we have to look at it. Stands for Republican.
That's what I thought. And we've got some districts that never have voted Republican.
But that's the result of the data. In doing this analysis, there is limited data, especially if there's an uncontested election. Things like that, we're not going to get the winning party necessarily. When you do this analysis, we're trying to determine, is there racially polarized voting? And you have to look at primaries, and then you have to look at general elections. But this doesn't necessarily represent who represents the seat. It represents the best data that we have there.
Then that brings to me a question on the best data you have.
Yes.
Because if that shows Republican for all 7 districts, and that just has not happened, and to me that would be easily found to, that really brings to me a question to mind. How in the world can you miss? There hasn't been a Republican running in Mr. Scurry's district in 30 years. There hasn't been a Republican running in Travis Reeder's district in probably 20 years.
Yeah.
So how can you have districts where there haven't even been that party on the ticket, and you show that as a winning party?
Well, I mean, that's what we'll go back and look. I mean, whatever this race was, or the race is in there. In trying to do this analysis, again, it's based on the information that's available through the election system, and it gets more difficult. The importance of it, though, is if you're going to use this to have a reason to diminish the minority influence districts, I don't think the county council is going to do this. So I really don't think it becomes an important factor here, because you haven't had that much change in the population. But I totally understand this. You're not the only county to ask that question, and I'll be glad to get our statisticians to follow up on this.
Yeah, you understand my question. It brings to question the validity of a lot of these if that is such a glaring error.
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily, who is this, when there was a contested election on what, this goes back 10 years or more.
I'm saying that there haven't even been Republicans running in any of those districts in 10 years.
But if you go, but what I do is I'll go back and I can pull exactly what races it was considered and share that information with you.
Yeah, that would really ease my
yes, sir.
concerns.
Certainly.
I'd like to know, on each district you has voted in the last 5 years on a percentage and has not voted in the last 5 years a percentage.
Mm-hmm. Explain
that, because the percentages don't total anywhere close to 100.
No, it's just the percentage that have voted. It does, well, I don't have, it shows the percentage of, It's the percent of, you see the percent of white voters. In each district, it's showing you the percent of white voters, the percent of black, and the other registered voters.
But then up under it, like, then it has not voted, how could it be that high if the one above it for the last 5 years was higher?
Yeah. For instance, in my district, 79% did vote in the last 5 years and 77% didn't vote. I'm not good at math, but that's like
what
146%.
Yeah, let me follow up. Let me get our statisticians to comment.
We were talking about that earlier.
Each one of those are all the same way.
Yeah. No, listen, I understand, and that's why this is an educational thing to go through that. But let me, excuse me before I forget, make a note of that. Okay.
Other questions?
As we work on these maps, though, we really don't know, we could redraw the lines thinking about location, but we don't know how many people are in that area.
We can provide, it's actually online, and we can send a link here, but we also have available your county by census blocks, the number of people in each census block, and you can get an idea on where that is. Now, I understand you need that. I'm somewhat hesitant when you start doing that because then it's almost too much gerrymandering here, which ones you have to do. But it's certainly helpful you understand where the blocks are and you see that they're not equal population. But it's helpful, I think it's helpful when you do look at your communities of interest. Maybe there's a small area here or bigger area there, but that's available. We can send you that link. It's available online. You can pull up Newberry County and you can see by census block how many people
Where would we
are in
pull
each
that
there.
up at?
I'll send you the link. It's on our webpage, which is well, it's a couple links down. Our webpage is www.rfa.sc.gov, but I'll send Jay
that would be easier if you could send it to Jay.
Jay, the direct link,
that link to us.
and you can see that.
Right.
But yeah,
We may have some areas you're thinking, okay, I'll draw it here, and it's very little population in there.
Yeah. So that's
and I'm
why.
District 2. I got the most to try to maneuver.
Yeah. I mean, and it's technology has made this a lot easier to do that, but it's available, and we'll send you that link.
Okay.
So again, I mean, the emphasis here, the way we try to do this is we know some districts have to give up, and it's easier to start knowing once you start taking away from those, how does that start affecting the others? That's generally how we like to do it, but again, when you're trying, that's easy to balance one person, one vote. But then once we do that, we have to look at the Voting Rights Act to make sure that we don't move too many blacks or too many whites and you get accused of packing a district or cracking a district there. So it's a step-by-step process. You take that first step to move the population, and then you have to calculate all the statistics and see where the black and white voters, how does it shake out, and then you re-examine there.
Any other questions?
Y'all might have asked this question before I got here, but I noticed last night on the news where they had moved Newberry to mostly District 3 as far as Senate races.
Oh, okay. I'm not involved with the Senate races.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest, knowing how much this council's got ahead of it, it might be beneficial. I talked with Frank earlier, and on our county attorney listserv, some counties have adopted a resolution that sets out what you're going to look at to make your maps. And Frank said he would share a couple that he has. When he sends the link, I will send those resolutions for you to take a look at. That is not the ordinance itself, but that's saying here's how we're going to do it. And that is beneficial when the public looks at what you're doing. And I would also suggest that you take Mr. Rainwater up on his offer to do a preliminary map based on what they think is best. And that gives us something to work with to start doing the communities of interest. We can, if council wants to, at the next meeting that we have, I can prepare a title-only ordinance that'll get us one reading down. But I think it would be beneficial time-wise. if we told Mr. Rainwater to go ahead and develop maps based on what they have, I'll have to get the school district addresses to them, but we can do that tomorrow. And so if you're agreeable to that, I think he could leave tonight and come up with the first draft of a map for you.
I certainly think that would be beneficial.
I certainly think time is of the essence. I know that, before the month before the filing fee, I mean, time, it sounds good, but the truth is one shift of a line could make a difference in somebody deciding to run or not run based on, they could actually be changed in districts. And so I think the sooner we can let people know, because in today's world of politics, you can't start in March, especially if you have a June primary. That kind of handcuffs them, in my opinion. Now, the rest of the council may not feel that way.
Well, that's why when we talked earlier, I suggested we have our third reading by the second meeting in February.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
That way, it's a done deal before filing.
So they got a shot at it, but the sooner the better. I know everything's the sooner the better. I know very few things in life where the sooner the better isn't, but I think for those strategizing,
If we could get a preliminary drawing from you, I think that would be very beneficial.
Well, I'm going to call it a draft. I'm not going to call it a proposal because
Right.
it's a starting point. Because people get very nervous about what's been said and done, and I've been in all kind of meetings and people get questioned. But if y'all are agreeable, we can certainly, if everybody understands, we'll just give you something to start with. But you understanding that, as the Senate says, everybody reserving their rights, to make changes and suggestions. Again, we can make the numbers work out a little bit better, but does it respect the communities of interest? Does it protect everything that you're looking for? And do that. As long as everybody understands that, then it just takes away from unnecessary frustration.
You think that it would be possible for us to have that a week from today, December 8th?
Probably not. I'll probably get it to you in 2 weeks. Because I've got two other big
We will not
counties.
be having a meeting on December 15th. That's something we're going to be discussing later this evening about possibly moving the 15th meeting up until the 8th.
Yeah.
We had some conversations about that due to us being able to have a quorum on the 15th.
Yes,
and so that's why I was wondering we would.
but is that something you could get out to Jay and he could email out to us the first draft?
When it's ready, I can email it to Jay and y'all can look at it. I just
Okay.
don't think I can have it by the 8th, knowing the other counties that we've got to get done by
At least
that
we could
time.
have it over the holidays to kind of look at and get some thoughts.
That's my goal. I think we can get it to you in time for the holidays, just for you to consider and come back.
We could have our first title only reading if we moved it up to the 8th. Could we not?
Yes, sir.
See why not.
I mean, title only, when I was in Greenville, that was how they practically did every first reading. It's not something that's common here, but with your agreement, I can prepare to get it started, and that helps us because then that gives us more opportunities to get second and third.
Yeah, that gives us some time.
I'm not usually a fan of title only, but in this case, I think it's appropriate.
I'm good with it.
Councilman Reeder, are y'all fine with him doing the first draft for us and having the first reading?
Sooner the better.
Title only?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm good with it.
Okay. Councilman Hipp?
Yes.
Okay. We just kind of straw poll and we're not taking an official vote.
I mean, you don't have to, I'll just
Right.
prepare. I will offer one other thing. Through my listserv, and I don't know how quickly Mr. Rainwater can get it to me, but through my listserv, I have what Oconee County adopted as their resolution. This is just setting out the parameters that you are going to consider when you look at it. I'll send that to you tomorrow. Well, I'll wait and see if Frank
Yeah,
has any.
we should have had one, I guess, by now. But yeah, if I may add on to that, what's important, and I should have covered this in the court cases as far as the process. Again, since y'all are much more responsible, it's much better to set all your criteria up front and say in advance what your goals are. The courts have frowned upon a county or anybody passing a map without much discussion. And then when they get sued and you get into court, there's a post hoc justification on why you did something. The courts frown upon that. So it's important in these resolutions, and some of them are basic, that it says we're going to respect one person, one vote. But you're going to outline, we're going to be below 10%. I mean, some counties may say we want, again, be below 5%, 4%, but you can say we're going to be below, at least, we're going to be no more than 10% in deviation. We're going to respect the Voting Rights Act. But when you get to communities of interest, generally a lot of them say we're going to respect the communities of interest. But if you can say what's more important, if there's something particular about a community of interest, if you want to make sure you're protecting a certain part of the Voting Rights Act or certain communities, I mean, that's important to lay out front. It's not always required, but the more you can lay out front what your overall goal is, so your plan supports your goal, your acknowledged goals up front, you've just got a stronger position out there. But again, you can't think of everything, but you need to acknowledge that we're going to try to reduce splitting precincts, and we understand they have to be contiguous, we have to be compact and things like that. So
we could have our resolution, pass our resolution, and then follow that up with a first reading title only in the same meeting?
Yes, sir. What I would suggest is I'll send out the versions, and then we'll go ahead and prepare. If the meeting gets moved, we're going to have to start like tomorrow to prepare the agenda for the 8th. And so we'll go ahead and put first reading of the redistricting ordinance on there, and we'll also put a resolution. We might do the resolution first, so it'll show procedurally that it happened. We set the criteria. And as soon as I send one to you now, Frank said he has another one on its way. I will send out, you can look from me tomorrow, the resolution or resolutions that have been adopted. And then I'll just go ahead and put resolution adopting, the criteria. And we can certainly get it honed down by the time we have the meeting next week.
Perfect. Anybody else have anything for Mr. Rainwater? Anything else for us, sir?
no, sir. You tell us, how we can be of service to you, and
I think we just did.
And my goal, I tell our staff, is I try to keep the ball in your court.
Yes, sir.
But it does take us time. We do have 35 counties we're working with. Half of those are done, and we've got some other cities that we're working on. So, we're kind of in an easier spot, but just with the rush right now, it's just be a little patient. We'll get you a draft here before the holidays.
Include with that draft the statistics.
Oh, yes, sir.
Analysis and explanation for some of those deviations.
Yes. We can give you the new statistics. Depending on time, we can always create. It depends on how fast and time, but we can also create a different map showing exactly which census blocks changed. So we can outline those for you to show that these shift from 1 to 2 or 3 to 4 in those areas. So I'll make sure the staff does that. So, and what we'd like to do, if we could send it electronically to you, and then you can share it or print it here and come in and view it, whatever works out for you.
That'd be great. The way the world runs now.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Anything?
Okay.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing your first draft, sir.
Thank you.
All right, public comments, none. For those of you that had to come in a little late because of work requirements, I know 4:30 is kind of difficult. Debbie fell and broke her ankle in 2 places this morning and is having surgery tomorrow morning. So, and we'll do that again to keep her in prayer as we go into our regular scheduled meeting. So Jay is trying to be Jay and Debbie, and those are huge shoes to fill. So no public comments, he said. Any comments from the county administrator?
Nothing from me, Mr. Chairman.
Any comments from council members? Mr. Shealy,
None from me.
Yep, Ms. Airwood, Mr. Scurry, Mr. Reader,
Who got the ankle broke?
Debbie.
Oh, my God. Okay.
Did she, was this an on-the-job injury?
And she was at home, is my understanding.
Okay.
Her husband had blown some leaves up and she fell in those, I think, so it's going to be his
my.
fault.
He's gonna be a
I'm pretty sure that's how that works.
He's gonna be a butler for a while.
I bet she gets a big Christmas present.
Yes, sir. After 35 years of marriage, I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
He must accept the blame.
Yes. All right, hearing none, is there a motion that we adjourn until the next meeting? Motion and a second. All in favor by show of hands, it is unanimous. We are standing adjourned until 6 o'clock.